This is somewhat different from the original intention. For a few weeks now, I have experienced a kind of fog, either because of the effects of an undiagnosed COVID infection or a flu-like reaction to the vaccine. This fog is a border. I stared for days at the notes prepared for this talk, and I can't connect to them. Additionally, while many see the online as a more open form of communication within the arts, I am not alone in knowing that it does not contain some of the most important aspects of any attempt to reach out for community. The sharing of space, our perception of tone and expression, the humour and the interaction, and all of the minute details that are usually more important than what we think we have come to experience. For me, that is how I see located listening also. It's not about expectations, but about letting go of such things. So, I'm just going to talk. I'll make mistakes, forget things. That's okay. As a species, we're builders of borders and escapists. We construct structures that contain, and we long to escape them. At least, that's what we think we're doing. But we often invent new systems to deal with the old systems. In escaping, we simply replace one uniform with another, one border with another. Perhaps it's in our nature to constantly need these straight lines. I'd like to talk about borders. Faulty borders. And I'll go for a big one to start with. This word, nature. It's not a word that I like or ascribe to. It is, after all, just a human invention and a way to define our environment along a them and us line. There is us, the human species, and there is nature. Yet we are, of course, just another species, just one species amongst many. Contained within the word nature is the idea of dominance, of superior position. And, I argue, it renders nature a performative, bringing with it definitions and perceptions filtered through thousands of years of human bias. Of course, recently, nature has bitten back. And yes, one can turn on the radio or the TV and hear stories of how we are reconnecting with the sound of nature, with our surroundings. Yet listen closely and you will find most of that is framed within the reference of the idyll, of how beautiful these sounds are. And you will hear mostly birds, usually song rather than all of their other communications. course, for other species, their environments are battlegrounds, constant fights for survival, and intense sensory meshes that we can barely perceive, let alone cope with. And so we are at borders around this word nature, this idea nature. We expect it to perform for us. What you're listening to now is the sound of water being drawn up through the roots of a tree, a cherry birch tree. It's an amazing sound. It's an environmental sound, a species sound. But it's not a forest bath. When it comes to field recording, there is the practice of editing out of a plane going overhead, or of traffic noise, and presenting the results to say, here is a document of this place. But it isn't. It's a sanitized trace, nothing more. We've idealized it, objectified it, pacified it, made it comfortable. When COVID once again reminded us of our fragility, any number of projects sprang up quickly to document the pandemic, both in photographs of empty streets, empty cities, and in sound. Despite many of them being open in terms of the ability to contribute, it wasn't hard to see how some of these were at first colonised by a sanitized, cinematic distortion of place and situation. In our eagerness to document, we also capture the borders that exist within mainstream sound and visual cultures. We see traces of the gendering of technologies and approaches, a reliance on rules, the bravado sometimes hidden within the listing of equipment, or believing in tightly defined ideas of technological skills. This reliance on straight lines is the basis for most aspects of our human societies. They can provide reassurance that they are filters, and can also serve to disconnect us from the intuitive aspects of connection to environments and the myriad species within them. We're getting better at dealing with these borders and taking them down, challenging them, but we do have a tendency to think that once their walls are pushed over, the problem is solved. In fact, they'll often re-emerge or be replaced by new borders if we ignore the smaller, even sometimes subconscious details. How we frame the language, implied normalities, the status we afford within systems of hierarchy. And through our obsession with nature as a performance, something we use or try not to use, depending on our needs and our desires, and our belief in what is best for them. What you're listening to now is the sound of ants eating an apple. It is an environmental sound. It's not a gentle afternoon cup of tea playlist. One of the big names in species sound is Ludwig Koch, often referred to as the godfather of nature recording. It's possible to listen to Koch's recordings and hear the documentation of species, but it's also possible to hear the earliest recordings of, for example, bird species in their natural environment, and including it, by Cherry Curtin, and also see the process of bordering in terms of access afforded by position acquired. Where are the borders that extend beyond situated perceptions? Keeping to the subject of historical sound archives, to me it is bizarre that so many remain rooted in problematic hierarchies. Even their names illustrate this. The Alan Lomax Archive is not the Alan Lomax Archive. It's the Zora Neale Hurston, Shirley Collins, Elizabeth Goodman, Mary Barnacle, Jean Ritchie, Antoinette Marchand, Joan Halifax, Anna Lomax, and Alan Lomax Archive. All of these women were central to the field trips undertaken in the name of Alan Lomax. They were the researchers, the ethnographers, and often the people doing the recording itself. And yet, the position is given to Alan Lomax. Reassessing this isn't to deny his role, but it's to recognise that borders were in place, and remain in place. And it has to be said that looking more widely at the history of field recording, there are of course questions around which communities were given power to document themselves, or the power to take from those communities. We're starting to ask these questions, and that's good. Archives always seem to involve distortions, to become filters. No matter how open new technologies allow them to be, they maintain faulty borders too. It's sometimes hard to see anything other than glacial progress. Glacial being an ironic word in this context, given that we are melting those faster than at any other time in human history. What a shame we can't melt faulty borders with as much speed and disregard for also maintaining them. What you're listening to now is the sound of a small piece of rock dissolving. It is an environmental sound. But it's not a yoga session. Don't get me wrong, I understand the urge to escape, that we walk or drive out in order to find something restful, or that we perhaps perceive as beautiful. It's just that there's so much more there, beyond the surface. And it's more intense, more varied, deeper, more than is restrained by our borders. And importantly, if we spend some time listening carefully, we can allow environments to impose themselves on us, rather than just us impose ourselves on them. So what have we learned from listening during the pandemic? Have we learnt to value our environments more? To respect other species? Perhaps some of us have. But we seem determined to do so only in a way that's comfortable for us. Only in a way that's not that much different from the 1970s and New Ageisms. Though some still cling to the idea of superiority. And how we assess progress. And if we look and listen, we can see we're no different from any other species. The strongest survive. The loudest survive. Others are pushed to the edges. We can do better. But we need to recognize and accept the borders. Sometimes that's not easy. It involves questions that are uncomfortable. And the realization that equity is not always about forward, but about some of us stepping back. In environmental terms, our species stepping back. We cling to borders. We seem to need them to feel safe, protected. So the question might be, how do we dismantle faulty borders? What's our role in the space revealed?